In Elliott Wave Theory, every single wave serves one of two functions. It is either an action or a reaction. More specifically, a wave may either advance the cause of the wave of one larger degree or interrupt it. Now that sounds super simple. Unfortunately, the real world is a bit more complex. Luckily, Ralph Nelson Elliott, the founder of Elliott Wave Theory, set out to describe how markets behave by describing and illustrating all variations in patterns. Each of these patterns have requirements, known as rules, and tendencies, known as guidelines. Today, I'm going to teach you all about motive waves, both impulses and diagonals. What's up everybody, welcome back to another video. In part 3 of this Elliott Wave Theory tutorial series, we're going to be going over the two types of motive waves. They are impulses and diagonals. I'm going to teach you the rules behind them as well as guidelines that you should follow. If you haven't yet watched part 1 and 2 of this series, I'd highly recommend you start there. The links for both of those are in the description below. And just a quick reminder before we get started, please do hit that like button if you like this video and subscribe for more future content. For you, this will send a notification right to your YouTube account when I release part 4 of this series. For me, the support means everything and it allows me to keep creating content for you guys. Now, let's get right into it. In part 1 of this series, we went over 3 really important rules in Elliott Wave. They apply to motive waves as well. So both impulses and diagonals, the two types of motive waves that we'll be going over today, follow these series of rules. So as a refresher, here's a couple of rules that both impulses and diagonals, the two type of motive waves, both follow. Number 1 is that wave 2 cannot retrace more than 100% of wave 1. So for example, this is wave 1. Wave 2 must fall somewhere between where my line currently is and the top of wave 1. So if wave 2 were to look like this would be completely invalid. It can be anywhere in this range. Wave 4 relative to wave 3 follows the exact same rule. So this is the start of wave 3 to the end of wave 3. Wave 4 has to fall somewhere in between this range. If it were to be below the start of wave 3 here, this is invalid. The next rule here is that wave 3 must always go above the end of wave 1. So we have wave 1 here. Wave 3 has to go at least past the top of wave 1 here. If it doesn't and it was labeled as such, this would be an invalid structure. And finally, the last rule that applies to both impulses and diagonals is that wave 3 is never the shortest wave among the 3 actionary waves, wave 1, wave 3, and wave 5. So it must be either longer than wave 1 or longer than wave 5. And to put a guideline on that, as we were talking about at the start of this video, wave 3 is also often the longest wave, so it's often longer than both wave 1 and wave 5. Now let's dive into more of the specific rules around impulses. As I was saying, impulses are one of the 2 different types of motive waves, and they are by far the most common type of motive wave. Diagonals are much less frequent than impulses. So similarly to how a square is a type of a rectangle, impulses are a type of a motive wave. Therefore, they must follow all the rules that we were just talking about. In addition to those basic rules that follow for all motive waves, in an impulse, all of the actionary waves must also be motive waves. So this means that wave 1, wave 3, and wave 5 all must be made up of 5 wave motive structures as well, and follow the guidelines and rules that I was just establishing. Now, as you can recall from part 2 of the series, all waves subdivide into other waves, so each of these waves are made up of waves themselves. In impulses, wave 3 must be made up of another impulse. Wave 1 and wave 5 can be made up of an impulse, and they are most frequently, but they can also be made up of a diagonal. We'll get into what diagonals are shortly, but that's super important to know, is that wave 3 cannot be a diagonal. One more helpful guideline with impulses is that one of the waves is typically extended. Now what this means is that the 5 waves that make up wave 3 are extremely clear, and they might even look like they're on the same degree as the wave you're drawing. So for example, let's say the market looks like this. When you first go to count this, as you're looking to count 5 waves, you'll start at the bottom here, and the first one is pretty clear. You'll put a 1 at the top there, and this is pretty clearly the 2. It's the next low right after the 1. Now where do you draw the 3? Is it this peak? Putting this as the 4? Is it this peak? Is it this peak? Well, in real time, when you first start with Elliott Wave, this might be somewhat difficult to wrap your head around. Perhaps you saw this wave come in right here and then a drop right after. If you were to go ahead and try to draw the 3 right there, you can immediately see that wave 3 is shorter than wave 1 in this example. Now that's pretty rare to start off with that. As you know, wave 3 is often the longest wave. So you might be hesitant to draw the wave 3 there and try and wait out for the next peak to come. But let's say you did go ahead and draw wave 3 there. Another thing that you might consider in real time is when this started to break below the start of wave 1, well, that breaks one of the main rules of impulses. Now this is valid technically for a diagonal, which we will get into shortly, but diagonals are much less common than impulses as well. In general, you want to be avoiding things where you're leaning towards much less common situations. So let's say you took a step back, you still have 1 and 2 labeled, and you're really looking for the 3. Based on the couple of guidelines that I was just talking about, you think that labeling this a 3 and this a 4 doesn't seem great, even if this is all the market's given you in real time. So you're waiting for the next move upwards. Now the market gives you this, but if you're going to go ahead and label this as a 3, that 3 needs to be an impulse as well, which means there needs to be 5 waves inside of this 3. In this situation, it's pretty clear that there's only 3 waves that would make up this 3 wave here. So you can see that this would be the first one, this would be the second, and this top would be the third. So this 3 wave is also invalid. At this point, you need to step back again and continue waiting for that 3rd wave to come in. Now you get another dip, and finally, you can see the top of the 3rd wave would come in there, and the 3rd wave is clearly an extension. Each of these moves are very large as well, and without practice, you might even blend them in for the real waves, as I was talking about. The last important thing to know with impulses is the concept of a truncation. What this means is that the 5th wave doesn't quite make it to the end of the 3rd wave and falls short. Now this is extremely uncommon, so if you're seeing this happen over and over again in your charts, you're probably missing some other important detail and counting something wrong in here. Truncations typically follow a really strong 3rd wave, so if you see something like this where the 3rd wave is maybe 3 times longer than the 1 wave, that's when you should start looking for the 5th wave truncation to be a possibility. The next thing we'll move into speaking about are diagonals. Now diagonals come in 2 different forms, ending diagonals and leading diagonals. But in both types of diagonals, wave 4 actually overlaps wave 1. Now you might remember from part 1 of this series that this is one of the key rules in Elliott Wave, is that wave 4 can't overlap Elliott 1. However, diagonals are the one exception to this. Wave 4 always overlapped wave 1 in a diag. This is a key establishing feature of diagonals, both ending and leading. So in our impulses, when we had 5 waves, the 1, 3, and 5 waves were almost always made up of impulses themselves, or 5-wave structures as well, and the 3 is required to be an impulse. However, in an ending diagonal, none of the waves are 5-wave moves. Every single one of these waves in here is a 3-wave A, B, C. So to throw those ABCs on there, it might look something like this. ABC, 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 ABC. With a couple other rules being validated, this structure leads us to believe that an ending diagonal is in play here. Now the prefix ending of an ending diagonal is extremely important to know. This means that it must be the ending wave of a pattern. In other words, it must either be the 5th wave of an impulse or the C wave of a correction. All other waves, 1 through 4 and A and B, have waves following them inside of their own patterns. Therefore, they cannot have ending diagonals inside of them. So if we go back to our 5-wave structure of a motive wave, an ending diagonal can only be in the 5th wave. Next up, ending diagonals have contracting trend lines. Now when you're drawing the trend line of a diagonal, what you want to do is first click on the end of wave 2 and draw a line to the end of wave 4, just like that, and extend it downwards a bit. The next step is to click on the end of wave 1 and draw it to the end of wave 3, just like this. Now when you look at these two trend lines, you can see that they're clearly contracting towards each other. The space right here and here is much wider than the space from here to here. And if something is a little less clear than this one is intentionally drawn, you can go ahead and pull out a parallel channel. From here, you would want to draw that first line exactly the same, and for the second line, just draw this on top of the wave 1. We might have to extend that top line a bit to get our channel to fit there. And you can see, this channel is what straight lines would look like. This pink line is clearly contracting towards that other trend line. An ending diagonal drawn with expanding trend lines is not valid. So if you remember from just a couple minutes ago, impulses have fifth wave truncations that happen rarely, typically after third wave extensions. In an ending diagonal, the fifth wave has a similar concept. While this trend line holds nicely in this example, this fifth wave here, the fifth wave actually tends to overthrow the bottom trend line. And this is totally okay, because the trend line is drawn from the 1 to the 3 to figure out that it's contracting. The fifth wave, more often than not, will break below this trend line in order to finish. So don't bank on taking a trade long at the bottom of the trend line for the fifth wave of an ending diagonal. That's not going to suit you well. And the last thing to know when trading ending diagonals is that they often end up in a massive thrust in the other direction. So if we have an ending diagonal like this, we are very likely to see a very sharp move upwards, typically back to the start of where this ending diagonal came from. Similarly, if we had an ending diagonal in a bullish trend, we would expect a downwards move very strongly to the start of where the ending diagonal was. Next up is our leading diagonal. Now don't forget that the rules we talked about at the beginning of this video for motive waves also apply to both ending and leading diagonals. As we were speaking about with ending diagonals, wave 4 has to overlap wave 1. You can see hovering my mouse over the bottom of wave 4 here that it does break into the price territory of wave 1. Now if you're following along with ending diagonals, you probably can figure out where leading diagonals should fit into patterns. Just as ending diagonals were the end of patterns, or the fifth wave or C wave, leading diagonals must be in the first wave of an impulse or the A wave of a correction. What this means then, if we go back to our 5-wave motive structure, is that only the first wave in that structure can be a leading diagonal. Now just as with ending diagonals, leading diagonals are often split up into 3 waves per wave as well. So all 5 waves of a leading diagonal are typically made up of an A, B, C. There is a rare case where a leading diagonal is made up of an impulsive structure, or 5 waves as the 1, 3, and 5, and 3 waves as the 2 and the 4, or 5, 3, 5, 3, 5, rather than 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. However, it's extremely rare and you really shouldn't be looking for something like that. One of the only other differences between leading diagonals and ending diagonals is that the lines do not have to contract in a leading diagonal. They can either contract or expand, and both are equally as likely. So again, just to show you what that would look like, draw a trend line from the 1 to the 3 here, draw another trend line from the 2 to the 4 here, and this one's a little bit tougher to see with the eyes. You can see that it does expand a little bit, but I always like to verify just to make sure. So taking a parallel channel from the 1 to the 3 and drawing it onto the bottom of the 2 here, you can see that the pink line expands more than just our parallel channel does. Therefore, the pink lines are expanding. Now you've learned about the 2 different types of motive waves, impulses and diagonals, and the 2 different types of diagonals, ending and leading. Make sure you take notes and rewatch this as much as you might need to in order to really get down the rules of both impulses and diagonals. These are extremely important structures as they are the only thing that drives the actionary waves of the market. Every single actionary wave subdivides into either an impulse or a diagonal. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please do click the like button below and subscribe for more content in the future. And if this video was helpful for you, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you guys next in part 4 of the Elliott Wave tutorial series.